They had a state grant they got to fund that waterfront park, part of it, $100,000. And they were sharing that with the community, as they should, to say, hey, here's the good news, this is gonna happen. And then what happened was they released the images of that at the same time, and people were like, whoa, pump the brakes, what's going on here?
What's up, guys? We're here at Ridgefield Craft Brewing today. Shout out to them for allowing us to film the podcast with the mayor of Ridgefield, Matt Cole, to talk through all of the updates on the past few months, the past quarter, with the Clark County zoning updates, the Ridgefield zoning updates, and then specifically the Ridgefield Waterfront, the first renderings that came out just a couple weeks ago, trying to dial in and get some more clarity on what's happening, timelines, how citizens can get involved. So make sure to watch through the whole episode. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you have any additional questions for future episodes, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get into it. Mayor Matt Cole, thank you for coming on again.
Absolutely, Connor, good to see you again.
Gonna make this more of a quarterly thing as updates happen throughout the city of Ridgefield and Clark County, and there's a lot to talk about today since our last conversation. So let's start with recently you proposed or talked about the RISE initiative. Do you want to just walk us through what RISE is?
Yeah, so RISE came out of a few of our discussions as a city council over the last couple of years, where we started looking at things like downtown lighting, sidewalks, parking, accessible parking, things like that. And we had some stuff kind of funded in the budget a couple of years. It kind of last couple of years, it fell below the line that we weren't able to get it funded. And so last year, when we were kind of getting ready to look at the year ahead and what we wanted the vision to be, we were going to bring that back in. And I was looking at it and I thought, we can do so much more than this. We got to dream big here, because our downtown is really a focal point for our city and our community. Yeah. And so if you look around downtown right now, it's great. There's a lot of heritage here. There's a lot of history here. There's just a lot to work with. And at the same time, there's a lot of places we can go with it, right? Mm-hmm. The city did what's called a sub-area plan. That's kind of the technical term. They did a whole plan for the downtown and the waterfront about 10 years ago. And as I was looking at that, I was like, wow, we haven't updated this in 10 years, for one. And there's a whole lot of things in there that we had already completed. It was like the ramp, the ramp that goes down to the port property, the waterfront down there. There's the park laundry cleanup, which is right across from Sportsman's, just right over here, where they had to do some cleanup right there, and we got all of that done. And so I felt we would check some boxes, so it's time for that next phase. So RISE really became sort of the embodiment of that vision for what do we want downtown to be like in the future. And that's kind of how we got there.
Awesome. And you stated that RISE will only succeed if the community decides the heart of Ridgefield is worth investing in. Can you maybe just talk about what that entails?
Yeah, so at its surface, you can say like our downtown sub-area plan, like that is an urban planning exercise, right? You go through and you decide what the zoning is going to be, and how, like, what is your traffic management plan. You do all of those technical things to get you there. But to me, that wasn't ever enough. Like, what it had to be is the community coming together and saying, this is our downtown, this is our city, what do we want it to be? And I've had so many conversations with our residents over the past year plus, and it always comes back to they love the charming downtown, our unique identity, and they want to see that, they want to see it built up. And I hear things like, we want a bakery, or we want more shops, like more boutiques and things like that. And so in order to do that, we have to figure out what is the best way to continue building out downtown. And I think we have the space to do it. And it's really just about bringing that together, but it takes the community's input and partnerships with that, not just a planning exercise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to this conversation, because recently there was renderings that came out initially of what the Ridgefield waterfront could look like.
Yeah.
We've seen some comments, obviously, online and city council and whatnot, and looking to kind of dial in what the plans are, what the timelines are moving forward. But to start off with, let's back up a bit and move into Clark County rezoning, because it starts at Clark County, then it goes to Ridgefield, and then within that it's the waterfront. So starting on the county level, April 27, 28, the Clark County City Council voted 3-2 to select Alternative 2 as the preferred land use map for the next 20 years. You were in the room for that.
Yeah.
Can you just walk through what that meeting was like, what Alternative 2 means compared to Alternative 1 and 3?
Yeah. So like essentially what that was, that vote that the county council took last week, that resulted in a 3-2 vote that was ultimately favored cities like Ridgefield, the Center, and Camas, because we had some urban area expansions that we had been asking for. That was the culmination of a lot of work. I mean, we're talking like over like the last 18 plus months. This time last year, we were trying to get to the point where the county could authorize what's called a resource land study, because the areas that are looking at being brought into our UGA is what we call it. Those areas are designated as agricultural land right now, or they have like a urban holding on them. And so in order to de-designate them, you have to do what's called a resource land study. They go through and they do all the technical stuff, like look at soil, they look at the characterization of the areas around it. There's a bunch of criteria that are outlined in the Washington Administrative Code, 14 in all. And so our argument the whole time was saying, hey, look at all 14. If you look at all 14 for Ridgefield, you'll see that the areas that we're proposing to be de-designated are characterized by urban growth, which is what we desperately needed to grow. The county council, the county actually only looked at 3 of those 14. They're not actually technically required to look at all 14, but they in my opinion, they kind of cherry picked the ones that they wanted in order to kind of fit the narrative to say, hey, these are still resource lands and they shouldn't be de-designated. And our argument was that they are very much characterized by growth. So the one, probably the big one that's in Ridgefield is just north of Costco. There's about 200 acres just north of there, between there and Royal Road. And so if you look at it to the south of it, it's Costco or Union Ridge Town Center. All of that retail development, the commercial property. You have I-5 directly to the west of it. You have our city boundaries directly to the west of it, and I-5 to the east of it. And then you have the Cowles tribe directly to the north of it. So in our opinion, everything around that, everything about that was characterized by urban development, and therefore it made sense to bring that into our city. Now that's vital to us because, as we look at how we're going to hit our growth targets, it can't just be a spreadsheet exercise. We can't just say, hey, we got to move numbers around a spreadsheet and say that's good, because it's got to actually pencil for developers are going to come in and build, people who are going to actually build the houses. As it is right now, alternative one would have just been essentially no change. No expansions, no difference. It just would have been accept the density targets, you work into existing boundaries. Alternative two was saying, hey, here's some specific areas that we're looking at, and we want this brought in. So that was kind of the two differences between those two.
And what was alternative 3?
Alternative 3 was what had a couple of additional things that I think that the Planning Commission was discussing as well. That was never really in consideration, and so we always kind of said it's 1 or 2 essentially what the option were. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So as a part of that, you mentioned Richfield's proposed UGA expansion. The headline that I saw was that it could affect up to 519 acres. Like obviously that spot between Costco and Alien A is the 200 some acres. Is it 519 that potentially could be built on, or is it really focused on the 200 there?
In Ridgefield, so I know it's around 200 acres north of Costco right there. There's another area that's kind of right by off of Hillhurst, by where the middle school is right now, kind of across the street there. We call it a little donut. It's just an anomaly. It's an 11-acre parcel right there that has always been characterized as by city all around it, but has been designated as ag land. It's just a single parcel with a home on it. That property owner has been asking for years because it's literally just surrounded by literally the city, and it was just kind of carved out through something that happened 20 years ago. I never fully understood it. So that was another one. And then there's another parcel, a set of land, I guess, to the east by where the new elementary school is going to be built.
Yeah.
We call it the Jones McPherson property. So there's I forget how many acres that is, but there's a bunch of property up there. That one ultimately didn't make the cut as a part of alternative 2 because the Planning Commission said, hey, we didn't really feel like that was significant enough case to be made to de-designate that. And so I think that's kind of where the remainder of that balance came from. And we knew that, and I think that would have been, when you look at where the growth is going, especially with the new school going in there and all of the new commercial development that will be there, it will be essential. So it's going to be a conversation we have to have in 10 years. But right now, I think what we saw is a big lift in getting the parcels that we did get.
So just to clarify, like all of this is just dedicated for the next 10 years, and that's...
Yeah. So the way it works is, so every 10 years, cities in the county have to update their comprehensive plan for the next 20 years. It's sort of a confusing concept because you're playing with these two numbers, 10 and 20. So we do it every 10 years. We update it. We say, does this still match our forecast, what we said 10 years ago? Look at the next 20. The interesting thing about that and why we made such a big case for bringing in those areas is, what we've heard a lot of people say is like, well, Ridgefield already has enough capacity to hit its housing targets. And those targets actually are, over 10,000 people adding to our population in the next 20 years, over about 5,500 new homes and over 8,000 new jobs. And a lot of critics have said, hey, you can absorb that into your existing boundaries. And we said, yes, we can, but what it will take is redevelopment of existing zones, so existing neighborhoods. So that means like things like ADUs, it means like split parcels, it means, you know, all those types of things that when we talk to the public over the last 2 years going through this process, that is not the vision that our community has had. They said they didn't want a bunch of high density, high rise housing in Ridgefield. They wanted a good mix of uses. They wanted to have a good mix of density and different types of housing across the board. And so we took that to heart and we said, in order to do that, we need to be able to expand in certain areas strategically. And again, we felt that those are characterized by urban development. So it just made sense.
So in order for Ridgefield to expand and mainly be like single family housing instead of like the ultra dense like multifamily or high rise.
We want to mix it. You know, we definitely have a lot of targeted density areas that we want to have. So there's some new developments going in closer to the freeway across from Rosars. There's going to be some multifamily housing. The other misconception that we hear an awful lot is like, well, Ridgefield doesn't have, it's all just single family housing and it's all urban sprawl. Couldn't be further from the truth. We have over 500 different multifamily housing units in Ridgefield as it stands right now. And we have a few hundred more on the way. So that's going to help meet that need to hit that density target. And so that we think that if we do that, that'll make sense to actually get those things done and we'll actually be able to hit those goals that we have over the next 20 years.
Yeah. And then now again on the Clark County side, the Growth Management Hearings Board ordered Clark County to complete the comprehensive plan by July 31st, 2026. So all of Clark County essentially is having to designate their zoning for the next 10 years.
All of Clark County is, and they are, and that's kind of been the big gripe too, is the timing associated with that, because the original comprehensive plan deadline for the county was December 31st of 25. We're obviously well past that now. They were targeting, I think, mid-June or July to get it done. It looks like it might not be done till later this year, but it'll get done. And a lot of people said, well, you're putting the county in non-compliance, but really it's sort of a nothing burger. I mean, it's kind of a big deal, but like as long as they're showing that like, hey, we're doing the work and we're trying to get this done, then the Growth Management Hearings Board is going to say, okay, we're gonna keep it along. But in the meantime, there's some things that they have to get done before they can be eligible for certain grants and things like that. So
Gotcha. So again, on the county side, the county is projecting 190,000 new residents and over 100,000 new housing units across Clark County by 2045. Battleground is expanding into Dollars Corner, Camas, La Center, Yakult, Vancouver. They're all expanding. This Ridgefield is really just a part of, and it's all of Clark County. And most of Clark County is already, or most of Vancouver is already built on. So it's just expanding outward towards the spots that are still available.
Totally. And for cities like Vancouver, it's not even outwards. They're not doing any level of expansion. They're going upwards. So Vancouver has said very notably that they are done building single family homes in the city of Vancouver. So that's probably not going to happen anymore. But they're going to focus on is multifamily housing that's going to go upward in order to hit and a lot more densification as a result.
Yeah, and then moving into Ridgefield, kind of zoning in a little bit, the state says that Ridgefield, as you mentioned, needs to plan for more than 10,000 new people, nearly 6,000 new housing units, over 8,000 new jobs. And for context, Ridgefield's current population is roughly 14 to 15,000 people.
Right now?
Is that the number?
No, I think we're probably just shy of 18,000 right now.
Oh, shy of 18,000, okay. So still solid expansion that's going to be coming. So I guess with it, we're essentially talking about the city potentially doubling over the next 20 years. Or at least 50%?
Yeah, probably more like closer to 50%. The thing that we're seeing too is, like we've had this badge we've kind of worn on our shoulders, like pretty proudly, that we're the fastest growing city in Washington State over the last 10 years. What we've seen over the last year is the residential housing permits that the city's issuing have dropped dramatically. And so we're not seeing the level of homes, and so the growth will eventually taper off, and so yes, 10,000 is still a notable amount over the next 20 years, and that would put us at 27,000 ish or something like that. Not small anymore, but but yeah, definitely creates some real factors of consideration as we plan for our growth. Yeah.
Myself being in housing, we're definitely seeing how like new builds are sitting for longer. There's not as much growth, and some builders are now not building on certain developments that they were going to be moving on. I guess with that, internally within the city, what do you all think are the factors that have contributed towards the growth of Ridgefield, and then maybe like the slowdown of what's happening? Is there a reason for the slowdown?
So I think there's a couple of things. It's number one, like the factors that contribute to our growth is look where we're at, and you look at the wider metro area, and I'm not just talking about Clark County. I'm talking about the Portland metro area. Places like Wilsonville, places like Gresham are all built out. Camas doesn't have a lot of place to go, as far as like where they can expand to. Vancouver, like we said, they're not expanding. They're just going to go upwards. And so Ridgefield's ideal because, we're right along I-5. It's a beautiful location. Obviously, we got this 5,000 acre national wildlife refuge right to our west, and there's just like there's a charm and just a great identity here that people kind of graft to, and we've seen that time and time again. I'll hear it all the time that the reasons why people move here, but it's usually something like that. 20 minutes from the airport, that's a big deal to people when they look at it. So I've heard multiple people say,
we got some comments. It might be 25 minutes, but that's the same thing as 20
It might
minutes.
be 17 too.
Right. Depending on how fast you're going. And then I guess moving into the zoning debate in Ridgefield, the Planning Commission looked at two approaches earlier this year. So there's the Clark County vote, then there's also the Ridgefield. So Alternative 2 spread this growth across the whole UGA at higher density, and then Alternative 3 concentrates it in mixed-use hubs like downtown, Pioneer, and Royal, Clark College, and the Waterfront. The commission apparently was split 7 different ways and couldn't agree. Where does the council land on Alternative 2 or 3 in Ridgefield?
My council? The Ridgefield City Council has from the very beginning been widely in favor of Alternative 2, and that's significant in that it's not like everyone's just lockstep. I think that there's a lot of opinions on there, but everyone sees the need for continuing the careful and the smart growth trajectory that we've been on our council, and looking at those density targets and where we got to hit, and said, hey, if this is going to work, we do need Alternative 2. And for that matter, we talk a lot about density and the targets we got to hit. In 2016, the last time we did this, our density target was about 6 units per acre. That's what we had to hit. We exceeded that. We almost got to 8 units per acre. I think it's like 7.8 or something like that. So we exceeded those density targets. So that kind of flattens out the argument of saying, hey, we have places we can go. We're just not utilizing existing spaces. Not true, because we've exceeded our density targets already. By the way, that number that we've hit is just shy of what Vancouver's target was for their density over the last 10 years as well. So we've nearly matched Vancouver in our density as well. And again, that's made the argument and said, hey, we need to be able to expand in order to accommodate the growth that's going to come here in a realistic way.
Yeah. And then kind of moving into, how does RISE maybe separate itself from Envision 2045, or do they just work together and
there's a component where they work together, and in fact, I wanted RISE to really kick off a lot sooner this year, because normally we'll pick the initiative for the coming year. So in 26 we picked it, or 25 we picked it for 26. We're not going to really get to the meat of what RISE is from the planning perspective until later this year, because of the comp plan stuff that we have to finish up. There's a lot of data we're going to fold into that. What it helps us determine is some of the zoning, some of the mixed use areas we want to have, some of the transportation elements that are part of that as well. And so we'll get to that, but it's definitely connected. But RISE is still, in a larger sense, its own deal.
Yeah. And then overall, like the timeline of the overall Ridgefield rezoning, is that on the same timeline as Clark County overall, end of July, or do you guys have a date that you're working towards to have?
Yeah, well, we have to wait for, so essentially what we have to do is we have to wait for the county council to wrap up their portion of the comp plan for the whole county.
Okay.
And then they'll kind of kick over that final, it's called a draft environmental impact statement, so DEIS is what we call it. They'll send it over to us. We'll look at that. There's gonna be a comment period. You don't have to go through that. And then our council will look at it and say, okay, so for what they landed on for Ridgefield, are we all good with this, or what do we need to do? What is our input on this? And then once they're buttoned up, then we can button up ours. So ours is probably targeted to being done towards the end of this year.
Towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now moving into a bit of the waterfront deep dive. So this is where the controversy comes into play, really. And From the people that I've talked to that have grown up in Ridgefield and been here for 25 plus years, they're overall in favor of the development of Ridgefield and the growth. Like everyone loves having a Costco 5 minutes away and all that, as long as it stays next to I-5 and the high dense areas, and then you get out to the neighborhoods and it's more, just like a neighborhood living. But with the waterfront, they're concerned because they feel like from what they've been able to share input on like the plans for the waterfront, and especially the renderings that came out recently with the 8-acre park and then like a hotel and apartments and high density and all of this stuff. They're especially boaters, fishers, and people that have been using the waterways are concerned about it. Can you just kind of walk through like your perspective with the renderings that have come out, the waterfront project as a whole, where things might be heading, like how set in stone is all this?
Yeah. So, so the first thing I'll say is that it is still very, very early yet in the process, and I've sat on several presentations recently that the port has put on about the waterfront and the development plans that are in place, and they will be the first ones to tell you that everything that they're showing you right now is really conceptual. That's kind of how I interpret it. It's like there's nothing set in stone yet, and they are still kind of figuring out what is going to be the highest and best use of that area. And so what you probably have seen is like there's a hotel, there's a lot of like mixed use areas, a little bit of housing, a lot of commercial stuff, things like that, and then the waterfront park. The only thing I can say for sure about right now is that waterfront park is going to happen, and even the design of that is nowhere near final. So there's a lot that I think that we have heard that people are concerned about, and the port is very much clear on that they have a lot of work to do on that yet. So and then to back up a little bit further, just for people who don't know, I mean that site for decades was several different various lumber treatment mills, right? And all those in the early and mid 20th century, they all used chemicals like creosote that they used to treat the lumber. And in 1993, when the last one closed the doors, like they tell a story of like how they drop off the keys to the port and said, "Hey, we're going bankrupt, we're belly up. Here's the keys. The place is yours. Oh, by the way, there is a ton of creosote on the ground, so good luck with that." And so, so the port then had to spend the next 30 years doing a large amount of cleanup. The cleanup finally wrapped up, I think 2016 or so is when that happened. And then that's when they got to move into like, okay, what is the future vision for this? Now, for, I would say, the last at least 15 years or so, it's been widely discussed in various forms that there would be redevelopment of that property. That's always been the plan. How that takes shape is still largely TBD.
Yeah, and 30 years, $90 million is what the cost was to get rid of the toxic waste and all that. And now the port's moving towards figuring out, what development plan is going to be taking place. And Palindrome was the company that was selected. Are they 100% the company?
As far as I know, like they went through an extensive, competitive bidding process. I remember it was like 23 or 24 when they were interviewing different developers. They landed on Palindrome. Part of the reason they landed on Palindrome because is that that's a company who said, "Hey, we're willing to invest in this with you." That they're known for doing a lot of mixed-use developments. They did a lot of affordable housing stuff in Portland, and around the Lens neighborhood, they did a really cool area near Walker Stadium over there. And they said, "Hey, we're in this with you, and so we'll help with a lot of the infrastructure and stuff too, because they're a developer and they get how that works, and so they're going to develop whatever it ends up being, and that makes them an investor, and that's probably a good business decision for them." But yes, I mean, so as far as I know, I have not heard anything that says Palindrome is or isn't going to be here to carry out the rest of the vision. I think they will be. Yeah.
So how it was explained to me, I went into City Hall the other day and just trying to get some questions on some clarity. And so basically the port is separate from the city of Ridgefield.
Yes.
And how it was explained to me was that the Port of Ridgefield is a for-profit entity that their profit would go back into the city.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And so like they're trying to make revenue from the waterfront. And so that's part of why this development project, it looks how that initial rendering did, is because they're trying to get revenue out of it. So like part of the concern is that the city, or at least the port, is prioritizing revenue over like existing residents and boaters, fishers, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Can you just speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I think anytime we use the P word profit, in the context of these types of discussions, then we say, oh, bad, it implies greed or whatever. That's not what it is for the port. So the port is still a public entity. They're a government agency, just like the city of Ridgefield is. They have a very different mission. Really, what they at the end of the day are function as a developer here in Ridgefield, right? So they will, and they've done this with different properties. They will develop properties, build on it, and then, sell or lease them out. And then the profit element that they get out of that, they are statutorily required to reinvest into economic development initiatives in their area. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of that's where the P word comes in here. Yeah. That's and that's what they're doing down there. And ultimately, that is good for the taxpayer, by the way, because it's saying, hey, we will make money off of this, but that money goes to the benefit of you and me as taxpayers to say, you want roads and sidewalks, you want to have great lighting, you want to have parks, things like that. That's the kind of stuff that they're reinvesting into. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that I'll have to have a conversation with the port in more detail about a lot of stuff because, obviously the city doesn't have control over a lot of this, but one of the public questions is that, okay, the Ridgefield waterfront is zoned as mixed waterfront use.
Yeah.
Is the city able to rezone that to make it more strict on what can be built down there? Is that in talks?
Yeah, so as of 2023, the port is vested as far as the waterfront property is concerned. What that means is that they're locked into the current zoning and the current code that exists at that time. And what that really does is that protects them from, our city council, going rogue and saying, oh, we're gonna turn this into something completely different now, and then you have to go back to go and reimagine the whole thing. That means that they got to preserve their plan as it was right now. Now.
Is that for forever, basically?
Until I think they have until like 2028 is when that expires. I think I'd have to double check my math on that. Now, what's going to happen from there is and to be clear, they have not filed any development application. Right. So anything that we're looking at right now, like what you see in those drawings, again, very conceptual. Mm-hmm. It's not real. They have not applied for any sort of submitted any sort of development application, and until they do. I mean, it's just sort of like out there in the ether, right? It's ideas.
Yeah.
Once they do, then we look at that and say, hey, what do you want to do with that area? And does that align with the code that was in place? Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, then we have to kind of start going to the negotiating table. That's where the development agreement comes in place. That's where, like a lot of the buzz you've heard recently, and people point back and said, well, the city gets this final decision. That's kind of what people are pointing to, because they know that that's where we can say, hey, if what does the public need out of this? And so we'll say the public needs better roads down there. We need maybe better parking. We need maybe an expanded boat launch area, things like that. So that's kind of stuff that we can negotiate into. But again, until we get to that point, we don't know what they're going to come to us with in their application, and we don't know what our bargaining tools are with them in order to get there. So yes, the city has essentially a final authority within the confines of its own code, but really, it's the port's property. They are a developer. They have a vision for it, and so we're, as long as they're meeting the current code, we're saying, yeah, you're in compliance. So
yeah, interesting. So they have that until 2028 to potentially. Yeah. And they're planning to break ground in 27, is what I've
for
seen.
phase one. Yeah, and admittedly, and I'll dig on the port a little bit on this one too. Like, they haven't been super clear in their communications on some of this recently. This came about as, they had a state grant they got to fund that waterfront park, part of it, $100,000. And they were sharing that with the community, as they should, to say, hey, here's the good news, this is going to happen. And then what happened was they released the images of that at the same time, and people were like, whoa, pump the brakes, what's going on here, right? And then, I've been kind of hoping that they would be a little bit more out front of the communications on it, because there's a real concern amongst community members right now about what that is. And in turn, what they did is they turned their attention to city council, and they came to our city council meeting, which we love, because we love to get public input. And we listened to them for well over an hour on that stuff, and have been listening to them ever since. I was down here Saturday for our first Saturday, and just walking from Overlook Park to Davis Park, I think I had no less than 6 conversations about this.
Yeah.
And because it's really top of mind to a lot of people. Yeah. And they look at the mayor, they look at our city council, and they say, hey, we know you guys represent us. You can do something about this.
Right.
What are your ideas? And what I've been telling them is like, we're going to get there. We will absolutely get there. Now, even amongst that group, there's a wide variety of opinions that I've seen. Some people want, say, just leave it as is, just make it a big 42-acre grass field, right? And maybe throw a couple food trucks on it. Some people say, just scale back the development, or say, don't put any residential on there at all. Those are all certainly options we're listening to input on. And when we get to the development agreement portion of it, those are tools that we'll use to say, here's what we've heard from our residents, of what they want out of that space. How do we get there?
Yeah.
So,
is there any timeline estimate on when some of those initial conversations might start happening on the development plans? Because they're trying to break ground next year. We're already halfway, essentially, through the year.
I don't know. And again, it's really up to them, because they
just has to come to the city and say, here's our plan.
Yeah, again, I think the first thing to expect is probably a discussion around the Waterfront Park. That's the easy part, right? Because that's the thing that everyone can get behind. And then the rest of it, the actual construction of buildings and things like that, the redevelopment of that area, that will come. I don't expect that'll come for a bit yet.
Yeah. And there was a public survey in 2022 that was asking the residents like what they envision out of that area. And as you mentioned, it's like completely natural, like a mix of natural with some shops would be good. Yeah. And then like obviously boat ramps and stuff. But it sounds like that public vote, which was from the port, was only on the 8-acre part and not on the 41-acre part. Yeah. Do you know if the port is planning any additional polls coming up with being able to have citizens weigh in on what they want with 41 acres as a whole?
Yeah, that's definitely one that you would have to ask the port about, because they're in charge of their own public outreach, and they know what they have to do to check those boxes and make sure that they're getting community buy-in on that. We are doing our own, like through just conversations like with this, with residents on the street, emails. My inbox has been flooded with some of these things. And so we're having conversations too, but the formal outreach that they're doing, I can't speak to that. That's the port's decision and when and where they do that.
Yeah, speaking to the National Wildlife Refuge, some of the concern about all of this development is that, there is the initiative to turn down the lights so that bird migration can take place. But then if there's buildings here with lights on, then it's right next to the refuge. Are there any any actual studies that will be done on the effects of the wildlife with how close everything is? Yeah. Does the port have to do that? Does the city take care of that?
Yeah. So there's a thing called SEPA. I don't know if you've heard that term before. No. So it's SEPA, so it's a State Environmental Policy or Protection Act. So they, and when they submit, go through the SEPA process, they do have to have a comment period. It includes all other surrounding agencies, U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, who runs the refuge, the city of Ridgefield, the Cowlitz tribe is another one, like all of those. There's going to be a lot of people that have to weigh in on that. Yeah. And I know that they have been talking to the refuge folks as well. They've been talking to the tribe. All of that, those discussions have been taking place. And what I've heard a lot of it too is like, oh, if you put development right down there, then it's bad for the wildlife that will be there. I am confident that if Fish and Wildlife sign off on it and they feel like that this is not a threat to the refuge and the conservation efforts that happen and the habitat that happens down there, then we're going to be in good shape. On the other side of it too is like there's a whole bunch of things that they have to do. It's like they have lighting that doesn't create light pollution, so that it doesn't impact the birds. I was laughing because the night that everyone came in a couple weeks ago to talk about this very thing. At the beginning of the meeting, we did a proclamation that was called Lights Out for Birds. And it's, and the comments I've seen have been kind of comical. Yeah. And as I'm reading this proclamation, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, this is like terribly ironic at the wrong time. That doesn't mean that we're contradicting ourselves. Not at all. Our council very much believes in the value of the refuge and preserving that habitat there, which is why we do things like that. But we also believe in the need to find the highest and best use for areas within our city. And part of that is when we zone it, we're looking for activity hubs, right? For downtown to succeed, we need to make sure that there's a reason for people to come downtown. And what that involves is maybe part of the waterfront's part of that. There's other parts of town that are part of that. There's a whole interconnected component to that we're aware of. And it's not lost on us the environmental impacts, the wildlife impacts, the travel impacts, all of those things that we will be very much in tune with. And there's some that they just have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the overall message right now is that this is all very early on.
Yeah.
Renderings like cause some uproar because it's very like a boutique hotel, like all 250 plus apartments, something like that. All this stuff, it's a lot to digest at the moment. And just to know that those plans aren't set in stone, that those will change or that they'll be updated, and there is time for citizens to weigh in and share their input.
Yeah, and to be clear, and what I've been telling people is especially the people who are expecting no development, right? Like I cannot commit to that as an individual, as an elected official, as a member of an elected body, that where we vote together on things. I do know that the port very much feels like that needs to be redeveloped, and there's a lot of pressure on them to do that. It's just a matter of where we get there. So what I've been telling people is like, look, there's going to be some development that happens down there, but I am confident that we can, I'm not saying everyone's going to be happy and we're all going to get down there and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but we are going to get to a point, I think, where it is going to be a workable plan for the majority of the community.
Is there, I know you might not be able to answer this. This might be more of a report thing, but financial transparency with like how much revenue would be coming from the overall project. Is all of that public information?
It is, yeah. Okay. So the way the port is financing it, that they're in a taxing, their own tax increment area right now. How they use those funds, what their financing plans, because they're a public agency, that is all public record. So if people really want to know what those things are. And I think I'm pretty sure the port has put a lot of information on their website, so it's all publicly available anyways. But it's all public information, so it can be retrieved. Yeah.
Awesome. Anything that we haven't covered so far?
Ooh, we got a lot, didn't we?
Yeah, that's a lot of.
Yeah, going back to the comp plan, and as we even talk about the waterfront, like what I've been saying, and we talk about RISE, right? Like for me, the common thread through all of that is what is the community's vision here. Nothing we do is outside of the community's vision. So it takes partnerships. It takes them investing with us, giving us their thoughts. When I was before the county council, time and time again talking about this, that's what I said. I said our community has a vision for how we want to grow, and we don't want outside agencies deciding that for us, right? So to people who are concerned right now, for people who are paying attention, hang in there with us. Like come along with us, because we need you and we need your voice for it. And I think that's where the best policy and the best plans get made, when they're baked into a collective vision that we have for our town.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all you do for the city, and I know that you have all of our best interests in mind, and that it's not just like a big profit thing that people are seeking, and that we're trying to make Ridgefield, you're trying to make Ridgefield a better place for everybody. So I really appreciate what you do and taking the time to come out and talk.
Well, thanks for having me again. It's always good to talk about it, and we'll look forward to the next one.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, Connor. Yeah.